And welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Kuehl Show. I am your host today, the insider of the insiders, Tyler Kuehl. And boy, guys, we got us a big, heavy show today. We not just have trade deadline coverage, but we'll also be talking about college hockey talk, guys. The national champion has been crowned in the New England area, somehow outlasting the land of 10,000 lakes. However, I am not going to be alone today. Coming up here in just about a half an hour, we'll be talking with Nathan Strauss from UMass. He's one of the broadcasters out there. We'll be talking with him about the Minutemen's victory, and later on in the show, talking with the State of Hoppy from the Soda podcast of the Hockey Podcast Network. We'll be talking with him about the amazing season so far for the Minnesota Wild. However, we're going to get started with the big trade that happened recently. The Taylor Hall deal happened in the wee hours of the night, as literally did every big trade, because apparently the general managers in the National Hockey League figured for some reason that the trade deadline was 3 a.m. and not 3 p.m. But with that, we need someone to help us out explain this and get it from their point of view, because this person may or may not be a Bruins fan. I know, guys, a Bruins fan on the Kuehl Show. Hang with me here. I have a reasoning behind it. She is one of the hosts of the Slapshot Sweethearts podcast on Belly Up Sports and Podcast Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Shannon Walsh. Shannon, how are we doing today? We're losing audio. We had her for a second.
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I know I'm but it should be fun.
Oh, it's just a little behind. Okay, we can hear you. Okay, perfect. Want to make sure you were still there. So, Shannon, let's go over this here. The Taylor, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay.
It's just a little behind, but Taylor Hall going to the Boston Bruins. This is it. First of all, can we just say Don Sweeney finally getting Taylor Hall to Boston after losing the draft lottery back in 2010? It's only been 11 years since they've tried to get him the first time, but they finally get Taylor Hall there. This is a big move because it shows that the Bruins are actually kind of, I don't want to say buying or going for the cup, but they're still trying to be a top team. And the big part is they were able to they only get half of Taylor Hall's salary, Buffalo taking the other half, and they get Curtis Lazar. Why is this a big move for the Boston Bruins with getting Taylor Hall?
This is the best trade of the deadline. You know, we absolutely fleeced Buffalo for it. Keeping half of his contract was incredible. I mean, he is going to hopefully play really well on the second line with Krejci. It shows that they're not ready to quit quite yet, and I think that's really great. I wish they would have done a bit more on the blue line, but I think this is a really great trade, and it shows this is one of the biggest moves that Sweeney's made in his tenure as GM. So, I mean, it shows, one, that Sweeney is ready to moves and not just do those short-term rentals, and it shows that there's at least a little bit of hope this season.
Right, because the big thing, of course, is the goaltending. We'll get to that here in just a minute with the Boston Bruins, but you know, they get Curtis Lazar and they get a little bit more. And Lazar, for me, he was a big guy coming out of juniors because he was so talented. He was on that 2015 World Junior Championship team for Team Canada. He may not be a big guy. That may just be a little addition to this trade. But Taylor Hall is obviously the big fish. But the big thing, and that a lot of my friends up in Buffalo are panicking about, is what Boston only had to give up: a prospect and a second-round pick. And do you think that's because Hall's numbers in Buffalo, now granted, everyone's numbers in Buffalo are bad, but do you think that's the reason why this deal was so fair to Sweeney and the Bruins? Because they realized, hey, Taylor, you haven't really done a whole lot this year, so we're not going to give up a whole lot for you. And that's how they're able to kind of strong-arm Kevin Adams into making this trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially his numbers, but I was looking at the Buffalo numbers this morning because a lot of people are saying, you know, Taylor Hall's going to come here and suck. This was not a good trade. There are only 2 players in the Sabres that have more than 10 goals. So, yeah. I mean, I think the majority of the roster has less than 5. So, I mean, I don't think that you can come out and say that Taylor Hall is, you know, out of the ordinary here when he's got the same number of points as Jack Eichel. Granted, Jack Eichel's been injured, but Taylor Hall's been out because he's been setting out to be traded.
Yeah.
And I think that there's hope there, but also, I don't know. I mean, he has jumped from ship to ship. He's a free agent at the end of the contract. So they did have a lot to argue with there, saying, you know, there's no guarantee he stays with us. So, I mean, he said afterward that he's probably going to, but there, you know, in the contract negotiation room, there was no guarantee there.
And that's, I think, the big thing here for Sweeney is that, listen, this is it's literally a tryout because, you know, looking at it from the Taylor Hall side of things, yes, he was a good player on Edmonton, and yes, he did win that Hart Trophy in 2018. But when he went to Arizona as this big can't miss prospect at the deadline last season, he never really did anything. And that was the biggest problem with his, now, I don't say his development or lack thereof, but all of a sudden he's looking like a guy that, I don't want to use the word bust because here he is an $8 million contract and now one of the most sought after players at the trade deadline. But this is kind of, I don't say his last chance, but I'm just getting the Rick Nash feeling with this trade. And I'm sure you remember that as well with Boston getting him a few years back. I don't want to say an over the hill star, but a guy that's kind of looking like on his last legs.
Yeah, I'm concerned that it's going to be a Rick Nash situation, but I've used the comparison quite a few times now that he's got to find a long-term home again. I think that he's trying out a lot of places, and he's like, a young person in their 20s trying to find that long-term job to stick with from company to company. And it's not going to look too good on his resume at this point when he's just going for, half a season this season to X, Y, and Z team and not really contribute. David Krejci is declining. He's older, and that's who he's going to be paired with cracks there. But I think this is obviously a better situation than all the pieces are there for him to be successful.
Yeah, and that's why I think this may work out, and that's why people that are panicking because Taylor Hall had such bad numbers in Buffalo. Well, look at the team. Look at that Buffalo Sabres team is not that good, to say the least. And so now moving forward is Boston, a team that seemed like they've been falling back a little bit. Does this mean they're going to climb back up the standings, or is this them just kind of prepping for just a playoff spot no matter where they sit in that East Division? Either if it's the 4th seed, the 3rd seed, they just want to get ready so when it comes playoff time, they're ready to go whoever they're up against.
Yeah, I was saying earlier today, I think it's out of their hands in terms of where they're going to be seated. I mean, they've got 3 games in hand on the Penguins, and they do have the most games against Buffalo left. So those are 2 really bright spots. But the Rangers have the second most next to us in terms of how many times they're going to play the Sabres, and the Rangers are right on our heels. We just took a bad the Capitals, obviously, but we took a bad loss to the Flyers, too. There was no reason for us to give up those 2 points. And the Flyers, realistically, they, all their fans drop 2 or 3 more bad games and they, get a fluke win. They'll take that 4th seed. They won't go anywhere. But, the Bruins don't have that 4th seed on a lock, and they're now 10 points back from the Penguins in that 3rd spot. So, I mean, that maybe if they somehow find incredible chemistry, and they did win this deadline. So, I'm being here, but I mean, it's their spot to lose it. At this point, I don't think that climbing is going to happen.
Yeah, it's a very tough East Division. That's what we've learned. Like the West it's tough in its own right. East is tough in its own right. North is this wild thing of nonsense, unfortunately. But it's been a little bit tougher, I think, for everybody in that East Division. And obviously it's starting to kind of, I think in all divisions, starting to see a little bit of a gap between the playoff teams and non-playoff teams. But the big question, I think, with the Bruins, Shannon, is now the goaltending. Where's Tuukka Rask? Where's Halak? And that's what we've seen, Jeremy Swayman come in and everyone's like, Boston's got to get a goaltender. They got to get a goaltender. But, I mean, what's the timeline on Rask? And I'll be honest with you, this comes from me being a big Jeremy Swayman fan, dating to his days back in Maine. Now, granted, that was last year. However, Mike Richter Award winner Jeremy Swayman there is looking not too shabby. Now, I'm not saying that Bruce Cassidy should say, all right, this is the guy we're going to run with in the playoffs, but at least you have a goaltender there until Rask and Halak can be back to being 100%, right?
Yeah, I mean, Halak didn't look great prior. I mean, he's 37 years old. He was like to begin with. If it was a gamble signing him to start with and him again, I think they've got Vladar and they've got Swayman. There's no reason to sign Rask to another large contract when you've got 2 defensive prospects in the pipe. And I mean, I thought they should have shopped Rask to begin with. Like I said, he's on a contract here and they're not going to re-sign him. So you should have tried to get a return for him. But it's one of those things that it's such a personal relationship with the Bruins that tried to shop him, it would have come off controversial, blah, blah, blah. Everything around Tuukka Rask since 2013 has been a reason. He's been an incredible goalie. He's got his faults by no means should I ignore that. But I don't think that he's got a long future left in Boston. I think that Swayman, like you said, looked incredible. The loss on Saturday was not his fault. And Vladar looks good too. I mean, it's hard for both of them to look as good as, especially with how the blue line looks and how injured they are.
That is true. Boston took a huge hit on the blue line. Obviously, there's Krug to free agency, and then Chara going to the Capitals. But what is the future looking like for the Bruins now? Obviously, we mentioned it. A little bit down this year. Not the East, bashing, or I guess their typical year would be the Atlantic bashing Boston Bruins. They've taken a little bit of a step back this year. Is this going to be a trend that we're going to see going into next year? Are they going to fall back again? Or do you think maybe just a little bit of a youth movement can help these Bruins quickly retool to where they will be a team that's going for a division title and looking for deep playoff runs?
Yeah, I mean, one big question is what the divisions are going to look like next year, right? Like if they're playing against Tampa and Toronto, it's a completely different story than if they're playing against the Flyers and the Penguins and all that.
Yeah.
What great at their opponents right now, the Penguins are getting old. The Capitals are old, very old. And the Islanders are a good mix of young and old. And I think the Bruins are like that too, right? So Patrice Bergeron is getting up there in age. David Krejci is getting up there in age. Brad Marchand is middle-aged for an NHL player. I think the thing is he's peaking in his career, so I'm not about to call him old. It looks incredible. But, you can only rely on those older guys for so long. Has to step up, and I think not Charlie Coyle. Charlie McAvoy is that on the blue line, but he's only 23. I mean, you just saw Carter Hart have a horrendous season after having a great one, and he's 22. So anything can change in those early 20 years.
And that's something I think that I'm pretty sure Sweeney and Cassie will look at. I'm like, all right, if he has a bad year, okay. He's banged up a little bit. Obviously, maybe there's been some issues with COVID and whatnot. And it's tough for everybody right now this season. And that's why I think everyone this year should take any doubt with a grain for not just, players on the Bruins, Carter Hart, because unfortunately, maybe just because I was a goaltender myself, I look at Carter Hart and I'm like, that's the goaltender of the future. I still believe it. Everyone has a sophomore slump, even though he was technically a sophomore last year, but regardless. But, unfortunately, in Canada, the vaccination effort is not quite as going well as it is down here in the States. So I don't know about that. But if it does go back to the Atlantic Division, you'll see more of Toronto and Boston. And that's kind of the weird thing this year is that we don't really know who the best is. We don't know if the fourth best team in the East is better than the entire North Division. We don't know if the Minnesota Wild can walk into the Central Division and take care of Chicago and Florida. But then again, we don't know if Carolina is legit because everyone just kind of secluded in their own regions. Do you think that, in your eyes, you obviously follow the East a lot, seeing Washington, Pittsburgh, the Rangers a little bit, obviously, and of course, Boston. Do you think the East is the best division of the four in the NHL this season, or do you think there's another division that's really kind of flexing their muscle as the top dogs in this league?
Yes.
Oh,
it's interesting because that's our favorite question to ask when we do live streams when we have guests on. I am of the opinion that, yes, the East is by far the most difficult division. I mean, the fact that the Flyers don't look great, but they're by no means as bad as the sixth seed in the Central Division, right? But then we have people on from the North, and they say that 6 of the 7 teams up there are playoff caliber teams, which I don't believe by any means. I don't think that, the teams up there would make it very far if they were playing in their normal divisions. And I think you could probably say the same about the West. I think there's a pretty big drop-off when you get past Vegas and Colorado. I mean, Arizona is not, the playoff caliber 4th seed team that they are right now. And I think that says a lot about the competition is if you're playing, 7 or 8 games against 2 difficult teams and the rest of them are against non-playoff caliber teams, that says a lot about what your schedule and your record's going to look like.
That's, I think, the big thing that people are starting to realize right now is the fact that we don't, and it's like I mentioned earlier, it's getting a bit of a wider gap. The East is so tough. And that's why, do you wonder, is Buffalo as bad as they are? Like, is it just because of their division? If they were in that North Division, would they be above the Ottawa Senators and the Calgary Flames? Or if they were in the West, would they be beating up on the California teams? We don't know. But obviously, we got to play with the cards that are being dealt to us. What do you think? Who do you think in this deadline, which really was pretty quiet? Last week we saw Palmieri and Sajak go to the Islanders, have to shave their beards because of it. That's Mafia boss Lou's kind of way he works over there, but that's okay. Everyone has their own ways. He let the boys in Toronto try to grow beards when he was here and the way they made the playoffs. Now, granted, half the kids are 12 years old on that Leafs team at the time, so no one could grow even a little bit of peach fuzz. But over the last, 24 hours, it's probably been the craziest part of the trade deadline period. Is there really a big winner? Obviously, Boston with getting Taylor Hall and getting a depth guy like Mike Riley from Ottawa, that's a big move. Who do you think is better and maybe a little bit more competitive now and the winners of this trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased in saying that Boston did win the trade deadline. I do think Toronto made a really great move getting Nick Foligno from Columbus. I think that can't be ignored. Just because it was a couple days before the deadline doesn't mean it wasn't an incredible move. And I think, like you said, the Islanders did. I was absolutely baffled that the Devils gave up what they did for Palmieri, understanding that he wasn't going to re-sign by the deadline, but the door wasn't shut, and they gave up Zajac too, and I was just so baffled. I mean, I have always been a supporter of the Devils and that they can get out of this rebuild, and they're just not showing that they're going to get out of that rebuild. So, I mean, I think it's interesting, and what's interesting is that most of those teams are either on the East Coast or in those Atlantic Eastern divisions. There wasn't a lot of bolstering that happened in the Central and the West. I mean, Blackhawks tinkered a little bit, but there wasn't a ton that happened over there.
Yeah, it's weird because you see a team like Edmonton's like, all right, they got to buy at the deadline. Kenny Holland did nothing. We're going to have State of Hoppy on later. Minnesota's having such a great year this year. Billy Garrett's phone was on silent. And that's why I'm like, some teams have to, I say they play with house money. That's kind of the phrase that goes around with some of these teams. Boston, obviously, they want to show they can be competitive. They needed to go after a guy like Taylor Hall because they just need a little bit more, as we've seen. Islanders, they realize this is their group now, and losing a guy like Anders Lee for the year, that was a big part in that as well. The Leafs, it's been Kyle Dubas says, all right, we're going to do no longer the thing I tried to do with all these skill guys. We're going to try to get tougher. And they come out with Nick Foligno, which, I mean, now you're going to have Bogosian and Simmons and Foligno. And, of course, you have Jumbo Joe back there. And I'm just like, are we going to win this thing? I'm not saying. Now, like I said, the Leafs, they have to win out. They have to, get out of the North and then have to go up against the other three best teams in the league, which we don't know if that's going to work or not. But the Leafs, I will say this. Did you see, Shannon? You have to look it up. Someone posted this. It was a video of Nick Foligno having ice cream with his kids, because here's the kicker. Since Foligno's having to come up to Canada, this is the realities of the world we live in, his family's not coming with him. They're staying in Columbus. Can you imagine that right now? Like, in this world, having to go away from your family just to play some hockey? Oh, did we lose her? Oh, no. Shannon, you there? Oh, no. Oh, no, we lost Shannon.
So I don't know why it's cutting out so bad. No, you didn't lose me. I mean, yeah, like you said, Toronto looks fantastic, but there were a lot of GMs that either did nothing or did really peculiar things. I mean, the Ron Hextall's move to get Jeff Carter was odd to me because they're already a pretty old team and they didn't really need a lot up front. So, I mean, I thought it was weird. And they were shopping guys like Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who